Hey, Serge, thanks for joining us today. As we're getting started, give us a little background on yourself.
Hey, Brian, thanks for having me on. Again, name is Serge Lukoff. I'm a strategic account executive and specialist over here at Adobe Workfront. I've been with Workfront going now on my ninth year, and we were acquired by Adobe about a year ago. But I've been in the project management, work management space for over 22 years.
Wow.
So my role has gone from being a BDR to selling to the federal space, commercial, all the way to doing international localization and distribution. So I just had an incredibly blessed experience to the state.
And why sales for you?
Well, interesting enough, like most folks, didn't come out of the womb wanting to be in sales.
With a cell phone next to you.
Although now it's attached. For me, I wanted to do network engineering. So, my first job, they said, look, we don't have a network engineering role open, but why don't you try sales for a little bit? And so I did it and made some money. I thought, okay, well, I'll do this for one more year and then that's it, no more. And then 22 years later, I'm still waiting for that opening as a network engineer. So fingers crossed.
Did you get addicted to it? Because a lot of people, all of a sudden, they see, effort, reward, effort, reward, effort, reward, and it becomes a passion.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. A lot of it has to do with also the environment. Family that are in business, had their own companies, and I saw the kind of success and the travel, and there's a lot that sort of byproduct that really interested me. But as a kid, I had a paper route and went out and started my own little grass cutting company, and so landscaping company for 10 neighbors, and so it was like one of those things where put time in, you get money, and I love that aspect, and it's just been incredible, and it's a lot more complex than it was when I started 22 years ago, but it is a wonderful journey.
And how long did it take before you felt at home in it? Was it a year or longer, or no?
No, I would say pretty much out of the chute.
Really?
I majored at business degree with concentration in MIS and management information systems, and so I was comfortable with the IT world, and I enjoyed the relationship part of it. I enjoyed being able to not just talk with clients, but understand them and understand what they're going through. But ultimately, it was, and also not just the economic side of it, but if they purchased XYZ product, then we would see the outcome. And we have some really incredible global logos that I've worked with in the past, and I can attribute some of their success to the product that they leverage. So I like taking that.
Yeah, and you started in federal sales. That's always easy.
Right. It is, right? No, it's totally different from commercial. They both have their pros and cons. But I think ultimately for me, the thing about the commercial side is that there are a lot of different, we'll say, processes that you have to go through. It's a little bit more in a vacuum. So you can manage a little bit more.
Yeah. And what were the kind of epiphanies that you had early in your career where you went from, it being good to it becoming great?
I've been blessed with having an incredible ecosystem across my journey here. And a lot of it had to do with seeing, colleagues go to another organization, come back and say, hey, here's what is a game changer within our world, like not just from a monetary perspective, but the exposure they get to some incredible stories. And it became a little more challenging too for them. And so it really took on a sort of a life of its own. And so that to me was a bit of the epiphany of to saying, you know what, now I go with the mantra that when you're green, you're growing, when you're rot, and when you're ripe, you're rot, right? So to me, it was, okay, well, I'll take that next leap to that next bigger opportunity and see where it goes and see if I'm comfortable being uncomfortable. And so that to me became part part of the epiphany where I've been able to grow and take that next step.
Because a lot of people don't do that. They kind of stay at a certain level or even the downward spiral, which is even more dangerous.
Sure. I mean, I stayed with one company over 10 years. And I loved all 10 years of it. Right. But it took a time where you have to move on. You got to try something bigger. And at the time, the SaaS world was picking up. It was starting to really get a lot of interest. And so that's the direction I took. And so I've been within this space for 10 years as well.
And what keeps you there, though? Because that's a long time in the software space.
Well, I think so. My story is going to be a little bit different than everybody else's, right? So I'm in the work management, project management world. And for me, I really dug deep into that methodology, into that vocation. And so I even got a project management professional certification, which I maintain to this day. And so I really engrossed myself in the subject matter. And so once I did that, it was a bit of a commitment, but I found that it actually influenced the way that I began to sell. And so, as I grew into more of an enterprise role, it became very much this what I like to call an enterprise earned value metric selling process. And so that to me became a bit of my mantra, the way that I approach accounts and deals and the whole kit and caboodle, so to speak. And I think that's really what's allowed me to stay within this role and have success.
Because doing a large enterprise deal is a lot like being a project manager. You got all these moving parts. There's a timeline. There's lots of risks and traps and alternatives.
There's a lot of what have you done for me lately also, right?
Yeah.
so I mean, if we think of in the whole the concept of earned value, right, is about what have you earned to this point, and then what are you going to do in the future? And so I think within our world, in enterprise sales, a lot of it has to do with what do we bring to the table? How do we continue that value with our clients? And then how do we prove after year 1, 2, 3 that we as an individual, as well as a solution, are driving the value so that you can defend the rationale for you being in that account as a solution year over year. It's not a short-term goal.
Because a lot of reps look at that as kind of the customer success team, the consulting teams, the pre-sales teams, as opposed to their own responsibility.
Yeah, I think so. But if you're going to land those 6-7 figure deals, it's impossible. It is very hard to do, I think, without having a good customer experience, but the ability to have referenceability within the account, right? And so if you think of it as a workflow or work stream, you have to know the stakeholders up here as well as the different business units that are tangential to the overall goal. And if you're successful on one stream, you're going to be a tributary, you'll be successful in the other ones. And so that's what I think builds it up. If you just kind of run and let others do it, and not to say that, I stay in my lane, to be very clear, but I stay involved. My relationship with let's say the customer success world within my organization is pretty strong, and we partner, and it's important that the client sees it as well, because I will ask for, hey, based on your ecosystem and your experience, would you be good in introducing me to this group over here, or help us identify, right? And I think, and if you abandon it early on, then it just becomes very transactional, and we're about being transformational.
Right. And that's a big distinction there.
Sure is.
Now, how long did it take to get that certification?
Well, it seemed like forever.
That's too long, right?
There are requirements. You have to have a certain number of hours before you can apply, and then you have to take the exam. Mine was around localization of a software product, so I managed that process. And so, it took me about 2 years before I was ready before I could show the hours and then take the exam, which was quite an experience. I've never been as nervous going into an exam as that.
And didn't you just think, well, why don't I just read a book or attend a webinar?
Yeah, I mean, I tried those things.
Yeah.
But I ended up thinking to myself, look, if this is, I was like, but 25 or 24, I thought, look, if, if this is what I want to do long term, how am I going to separate myself from everybody else? What are the things that I can prove that perhaps, they see my business card and they see those credentials, or that I am, and I know this term is tossed around a lot, right? A trusted advisor, someone that isn't in there simply to say, would you sign here on the dotted line? It is around, I understand what you guys are going through. I understand the complexity and the impact of a decision such as this.
Yeah.
And here's why, right? And so, and it's not smoke and mirrors. It's very truthful in nature, because we have to be transparent with that.
Right, because the trusted advisor, the advice has to be more than buy my product or we have the best or you need this feature. I think when you get a certification like that, which I think is above and beyond what most reps would do, probably most of the reps you compete against or have seen don't go to that extent.
Sure. Yeah. No. It takes time, and
It's a lot of work.
it takes time. It takes a lot of time, and there are a lot of, again, constraints and dependencies to getting it done. But I would say in my 20s, that was probably one of the most mature decisions I've ever made. you know, and because of that, I've been, and I think it translates to any other industry, but I've just become so engrossed in it, that I think I drive value from the pre-sales to post-sales experience for the clients, and I think they also react to it in a way of, okay, I'm comfortable sharing what's behind the curtain, and we trust that our conversations will mean something, and it won't just go in one ear and out, because that's the other part which you hear a million times on your podcast is empathy and listening, but it's so important.
It is. And to listen, you have to understand what you're hearing. And to understand what you're hearing, you have to have some scope and experience with all the topics.
Yeah, you definitely do, right? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I can't say that I know everything there's on project management. I know enough,
Yeah.
but when I don't, I try to pull a little bit, right? Pull of that string and ask them to expand, and how that ties into what they're doing today, right? And I think, and what's interesting is that we've seen an evolution, where it's not just project management; it's also very much work management. Because project management is about managing the work, the start date, finish dates, and people, and that's work. Like you do it today when you put together a podcast, right? There's a start time and a finish time. There's people, right? So that's work, and it becomes a much broader conversation, and a much more, back to transformational, but a much more impactful one to have as well. And so understanding the lingo and understanding what people value the most is so important.
Because even when you're working on a large enterprise deal and you get different people's perspectives internal to your company and the customer, you got to be able to understand the difference between what's real and what's just someone's reaction to what's happening.
Right. Or it's a checklist reaction, right? It's something that they say, well, we have to have this. And when you look at it, like I think, I look at from the metric side for me is are the business outcomes. What are you looking to achieve? And what's the maturity of the organization? Like, are you guys ready for this? Because just because you say you want it doesn't mean you should.
Right.
And when you look at those requirement docs and the check, and it's a collective of group. It's never one person. It's always different stakeholders. And identifying those who put that together helps me understand the outcome and why it's important. But the other part is the prioritization of that, because not all outcomes are created equal, right?
No. And since there's so many different people involved, you got to be comfortable and bring something to the table for each of them.
Yeah. And guess what? Each one of those, stakeholders. I love your, the boardroom you're in right now. Each one of those stakeholders sits there, and their outcomes are just as important as the other ones, especially when you're talking about a enterprise-wide deal, right? So you have to identify and you have to understand where there's overlap and where there are dependencies to that, because you're right. I mean, it's important to them. It's important to me.
Yeah. And other than the knowledge about project management and stuff, what other elements think distinguishes you as a rep?
Well, I would say that I like to think that, you know, I'm pretty good at mapping things out.
Yeah.
I think that feels a little project management, but I don't think it is. It's
No.
really about understanding the organization, understanding who's where, and it's about having an account plan, and that's part of it, right? And so, just like anything else, January 1st starts all over, and so take the time and look at the map, look at the plan, and then let's execute to it. And to me, I think the folks that I've been fortunate to see be incredibly successful are the ones that have governance, which is organization planning. Like they get everyone together and they say, this is what we're going to do. They execute on that, and they're driven. And it's a continual drive. And I think that to me is incredibly important, because that drive then forces you to go and have the relationship with power, have the relationship with other business leaders that are either influencers or part of the decision making process. And I think that to me, taking all of that has been an important part of what I do within my role today.
Because too many reps kind of look at it more like what I call MacGyver, right? I don't know, remember the TV show MacGyver? He reacted to being stuck in a trunk, or there's a time bomb going off. It's reactive. Sales, it's much more like a video game where there's a beginning place and an end place. There's lots of traps and villains and weapons you can use to get there. But if you don't understand how to play the whole game, you look at it like MacGyver. Okay, they haven't called me back. Oh, they say they don't have budget. Oh, they want this feature we don't have. What do you say? As opposed to planning for all of that.
Yeah, I think you call out the risks and you call out the constraints early on. It doesn't do you any service. I mean, it's the old, qualify in, qualify out sort of approach. But yeah, I love how you position that, because it is part of the story, and it doesn't have to be fluid, but you
Right.
do
It's
have to
not like,
recognize.
yeah,
I
it's not
mean,
like a running track. It's much more like a video where you're going through a swamp, right? And there's quicksand here, and you got to swing a vine to get over it.
yeah. How do you react to, like, by the way, I have like my drawer here to my left has about 80 paper clips. So anytime I need to MacGyver into something in a battery, I'm good to start my
You
fire.
ready?
I am totally ready. The but yeah, I mean, to your point, right? Like it is part of the story. And if I can bring in that stream analogy again, there are different tributaries, and you have to react to each of those. I think one of the things that I've been able to do pretty well has been understanding the people, process, culture, and technology stack of an organization, right? And so to your point, just because they might have a technology in place today that works for them perfectly, so we're not going to disrupt that. But maybe there's part of that business unit that has to interact with the organization that the BU we're going after. And so how do we tie those guys together? How do we bring them together so that we drive the value of saying, stay in your lane, do what you guys are doing, but here's where we need there to be a partnership. Here's where they are gonna, what's in it for them, and here's what's in it for you, right? And I think those are things that, it doesn't happen on the first call, on the first discovery call. It is a longer term process, but it's one that you do want to have sort of your blueprint and your schedule to start going after those conversations.
And what do you think makes a great enterprise rep versus somebody who's more of a transactional, deal oriented, project oriented person?
That's a great question. I think a lot of it has to do with having a mutual success plan, understanding that this is not it's not a one-way street. I think it also is important for them to, not go back to trusted advisor approach, but for them to help map their internal processes and organizational stripes, right? So where you're coming in and you're not looking at it as, again, I hate to say it this way, but it's end of quarter. I've got to hit my
Right.
number. I've got to bring this. Like in my world, that doesn't work. Like, I mean, yeah, you can get deals that come and close early, of
Yeah.
course. But if we want to have that really large enterprise deal, you have to nurture it, and you have to work with it, and you have to be patient. And it goes back to the folks that I've seen that have been really good at this, is if you have a plan and you have an account plan and you're executing in it, and every week you're, okay, team, how are we doing here? How are we doing here? Then you'll end up in a good spot. And I think that to me separates, because you also have to have the confidence and the competence of actually going through that process.
Well, certainly the confidence, because it's a long time gap from the time you start to the time you close.
Yep.
And it's very hilly. And a lot of times it looks like it's dead.
Very true.
And you have to have the confidence that you can navigate that terrain. Now, who is typically your champion within an organization? Is there a particular persona that is it line of business? Is it
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's because we're a very in a horizontal market. Typically in our world, it's marketing and it's
okay?
also IT PMO. But we've seen folks put together more structure and governance around what they do today, and so it's gone from not just sort of the director, VP, SVP, C-suite within marketing, but also in a bunch of other businesses. But we tend to want to talk to ultimately the CMO. That for us is a really good spot to end to. But your different VPs, SVPs are ideal because they can sign off on the initial deals, and then as they see the impact and the metrics that we're able to drive back to the value, then it becomes a wider and a broader enterprise deal.
And where does it tend to get stuck?
That's a great question, and really, it is the internal strife amongst them. So
Yeah.
the hardest part, long pole in the tent, is always saying, "Do you know how your organization does X, Y, Z?" And I'll ask three people that question, and I'll get one answer, I'll get a second answer, and a third answer, and there's very little overlap usually.
Yeah.
And to me, that's usually where it gets stuck, is because they have to agree to their internal process on how they manage work, right? And I think that applies to anything that anyone's selling. And then once they're in alignment and they've come together with a plan, then things move along faster.
And what red flags do you see early that this deal's either not going to close or it's going to take so long that I need to back burner it?
Um, I would say usually when after your first few initial meetings, there is the sort of light switch goes on. They go, "Oh, yeah, we love it. Yes, we get it. We understand the impact. Let's run with it." And then our next meeting, there's a little bit more dampness. I go, "Well, it turns out that we actually have to start." So when they start to say, "Turns out we have to start," that then extends the cycle because they recognize that it's a much further process. The other part too is if in our sequence of events, if they don't come back and they don't, like, this to me is like a 75 to 80% certainty. When I give them their sequence of events, we're going to do this, we're going to bring in these stakeholders and sourcing and legal, et cetera. If they come back and say, "That's great, that's exactly how we do it today," then I know, well, all right, they haven't spent the time, and we're going to have to coach and work with them on it.
Well, that's it. Because if you start with marketing or marketing's your champion, those personas tend not to like to give bad news, or they couch bad news to make it seem not as bad.
Yeah, no, I mean, but I think it also depends on the person. I mean, we see an evolution in. I mean, marketing organizations are just within any company, right? They're massive, and they used to own their own budget, and now they're because they're so big and they've got a lot to spend. It's IT gets involved, and so it goes from a perhaps it's more of a where we can make the decisions to, well, now we got to bring other people in, and the other people have don't understand what we do, like, and so they're telling us, look at these other solutions that we already have in place, and it's not a Swiss Army knife. It's not one size fits all. So I think that for us, when it comes to the personas and the ecosystem, there is understanding, do they know what it's like.
And what drives you? Is it solving the puzzle? Is it competing and winning? Is it closing a big deal? What what's your Starbucks, your caffeine, your driver?
Yeah, I was waiting for a C, all the above plus. It's all of that, really. I mean, for me, I love to win. I think that's an important part of this role and the persona that we've taken as a career. Um, I like to be able to solve, but I also like to see results. I've had, for me, one of the I would say one of the proudest moments I've had is working with the federal entity who does life changing things, and us being part of managing what that life changing execution is. Right? It's something where you hear it in the news and you hear it in the president's speech, and they say we've done this XYZ, and I say, oh, we were part of that. We helped them get to where the president is referencing. That to me is important, and I think that if I go back to what differentiates me from others is I believe in this like stuff. It works. It truly works. You've got to iron things out. You've got to do some of the hard work up front, but it does work. And so that to me is the things that drives me is when I can see that there's an impact in our technology.
And what's the hardest part of your job?
The hardest part of my job, I mean, I think that is setting expectations.
Yeah.
Is setting
Internally or
expectations.
externally?
Again, C, all the above. Yeah, I mean, setting the expectations. I mean, it's like, folks want to, if I think of internally, my world today is a lot more complex than it was a year ago when
Yeah.
it was just
Uh,
the
yeah.
Workfront family, which was still, large enough, but you do have multiple streams that you have to have conversations with internally to get to the point you want to go, right? And the support is tremendous. It's incredible. It's an incredible experience here. But it's just like any other enterprise where I think has been my only enterprise company of this magnitude, where you really do have to be able to set expectations for all the stakeholders, whether it's the supporting team or the leadership team.
Yeah.
And those swim lanes are a lot more numerous than they were when a year ago for me. That's challenging. But then if I flip it to the customer side, right? It's setting their expectations that, yeah, I know you needed this yesterday. You can have it for at least 4 months because it takes time. Like it's not a switch.
Yeah.
That's hard because I want to say yes to everything, but I know that we have to say no. And just because they're asking doesn't mean it's a good idea. So I've had enough. I've sat in enough conversations where if I go back to the importance of referenceability, where a client has said to us, "Hey, as part of the implementation process, start with this feature, methodology, functionality, which is a complete opposite of what our recommendations are." And as much as we said no to it, they went down the path.
Yeah.
They did what they wanted to do, and then 8 months later, we were out of that account. And it doesn't matter how much we document and what you say, like that's the hard part is telling them yes and no.
Have you been able to preempt that? Because I've run into that a lot where people want to play with the product before learning how it works and how to play with the product.
Brian, every week every week. um, because yeah, I mean, everybody wants to do it themselves, and you go from a world where everyone knows technology, everyone is comfortable with their laptops and installing applications, and but if it's truly a transformative, if it's truly an impactful solution,
Right.
you can't
It's a
go it by
learning.
yourself. You have to have a partner. You have to come together.
Yeah, and I learned that the hard way when my manager says, you cannot just give it to them, because when it doesn't work, who do they blame?
Right?
They blame the
Exactly.
product. They're not gonna blame themselves.
That's
And
right.
and it's not an iPhone. It's not intended to just be able to open by somebody who's never seen it before, and they can figure it out intuitively.
That's right. That's right. And for the most part, they probably had experiences with our type of product with years ago, and where they drag the mouse is, and when they click on the button, they expect a certain behavior, but
Sure.
it's over here. Like, and they say, "Oh, it doesn't do it." Right. So we have to avoid those pitfalls. And so we're really good about saying no to that process and explaining why. It's not because we don't want to, it's because the rate of success is so small when you go at it alone.
Yeah. Cool. Hey, it's been a fun conversation, Serge. Where can people go to connect and follow you?
Oh, thanks, Brian. It was a blast for me as well. I mean, just LinkedIn. That's pretty much the only place I am. So search, look up at LinkedIn.